Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Chupacabra's Lair. I am, of course, Larry the Chupacabra, and today we're jumping back into our Ludum Dare showcase coverage with another 5 awesome games. So we'll just jump in here and get on started. We will start off today with a bit of a more existential piece called I Remember Alice by Linus Lindberg, and this is a more story/message-driven piece that features a middle-aged man who is in a repetitious cycle of life where he wakes up, eats breakfast, goes to work, eats dinner, and goes back to sleep. And this carries on and on for quite a while, where he's just sort of mentally thinking to himself, oh, it's a beautiful new day. Better go get some breakfast. Alright, well, it's nice and warm outside, but I've got to get to work. I can't dilly-dally about because I need the money. And then he gets out of work, he's like, oh my goodness, I'm starving. And then off to bed once more. And the cycle continues on along this path for, a few rounds, and then you eventually get to the point where it's like, it is a kind of nice day. I really wish I could go for a swim, but he just can't. He's just too busy. The cycle of life has just got him so enthralled that he just can't seem to find the time. And then, just about to the point where you're sort of tired of this repetitive cycle, you get to the point where he wakes up and he's like, oh my goodness, I had a dream last night. I dreamed of her again. I dreamed of Alice. And then this is where the story starts to break into the Stanley Parable type territory, and we start to assess our life and what we've been doing. Who is this Alice? Is she a friend or an old colleague? No, this is an old love interest. This is someone we used to live with. But why did she leave? And then we find that, well, this repetitive cycle of life is what made our love leave us for newer, brighter horizons where people have time for them, time for themselves, and time for life. I think this is a really cool game. I mean, this might be something that a lot of folks would categorize as a walking simulator, and it can get fairly repetitive fairly quickly, but it has a very strong message of, sometimes you gotta stop in life and smell the roses and make time for yourself and make time for friends, because much like I myself have known the recent months, you can end up working yourself to death. So we've got a really strong message here, and that sort of is like what lies beneath the surface of your average day-to-day work life. There can be a few more things that end up going on. And then the game has also got a really nice set of artwork. You can clearly tell a lot by this man by the way that he's presented. He's sort of this stuffy middle-aged guy who's really more concerned about work than he is about maybe friends or obviously relationships. And then there's a lot of flow of what's going on, despite the very repetitive nature of the game. I mean, it sort of works towards the narrative when, everything in the background kind of fades like it would be if you were sort of like in this sort of mental funk in your life and you were thinking about what was going on and why you were feeling so depressed or unhappy with everything. And I felt that was a really nice effect. On the other hand, I might have enjoyed maybe a little occasional pop-up window of a dream sequence, or maybe that, coffee shop down by the river when he starts to talk about it. But otherwise, I didn't think that was too bad. I would maybe play around with a different selection of music. I know it can be hard to find just the right type of music. I have my own issues finding music for videos and such, but I ended up playing without my headset on or just with sound muted because that music after a while can be this really shrill, piercing effect, which, not for everybody and can get a little annoying after a while. But I believe the goal of this game was to create a very retrospective sort of story, and you definitely get that despite the very simple controls and very specific levels of interaction, so very nice job. It reminded me a lot of games like, obviously, the Stanley Parable and Dear Esther, so keep up the good work, Mr. Lindberg. After Alice, we have a game called Mr. Fluffykin's Great Sorting Adventure, in parentheses, also how the internet works, or at least how we think it does. And Mr. Fluffykins is a game by some of my pals over at Two Scoops Games. I've looked at some of their games before, and they do a lovely job. And Mr. Fluffykins starts out his job in what appears to be a mail sorting room full of an influx of mail and videos and pictures, and he has 3 machines that he needs to put these objects into in order for them to get processed, and then he has to take the objects then out of the sorting machines and send them on their merry way in the appropriate receptacle for sending them off to the rest of the internet. Everything sort of starts out pretty simple. You get some stuff coming down the conveyor belt, you pick them up, put them on the line, and then they get processed. And you're like, okay, we put letters in the letterbox and pictures in the picture frame, and then we put mail in the mail slot, and we're good to go. But then it starts to start growing in a little bit more complications. Sometimes there's garbage that comes through the internet. I think we've all seen that on a time or two, you know. Shit posting and spam mail and broken loading bars for video and maybe an image that won't load. And they come out of the conveyor belt and you gotta grab them up and put them down there in the shred box for the things that don't belong going out the window. And then you gotta make sure at the same time that you're not letting the inbox of your conveyor belt overflow, so you gotta keep putting letters in all the machines, and then you know, those conveyor belts or the sorting machines can get full too, so you gotta make sure that those are all put off and the packages going out, and it gives you a really good sense of the chaotic mess that goes on inside your average web server in any given day, to say nothing of sites like Twitter, Facebook, or maybe Reddit. On the gameplay side of things, it's you get a couple of options. You can click around the map or the room in order to pick things up or to deposit them. And then you can similarly use the arrow keys to sort of wander about and pick things up and sort them and go about your merry, fluffy, cute business. And I tended to sort of gravitate towards the mouse clicking. I'm always a fan of mouse clicking over too much keyboard interaction when at all possible. But I noticed that in order to pick things up, you had to end up spam clicking quite a bit just to pick things up and then put them down on the conveyor belt. And then, especially when using the mouse, there was a sort of a pathing issue when trying to walk around objects or to, say, deposit some garbage in the shred box because things are starting to get a little overwhelming. I might fix a few of the hitboxes, I guess, might be the problem there. But if you were more of a fan of the arrow keys, those seem to work pretty well. But the hitbox, again, on the shredding machine can be a little bit hiccupy. The artwork is pretty solid. I really like that. It reminds me a lot of their other game, Kickbot, that I did a review for a while ago. I think it was for the Flappy Bird Jam, or it might have been for Cyberpunk. I can't quite remember. It's got a very muted color palette overall, but there's a nice amount of detail in all of the pixels here. Nice rounded corners, a high level of detail inside of the TV sorting box, and then you can kind of get an idea of what's going on inside the picture processor, so very nice job on that, Mark. There's not too much to say on the side of sound. There's no background melody, but there are some nice sound effects for shuffling of feet and picking up of objects and sorting of mail and then the shredding of garbage mail or spam. And I definitely liked the fact that the spam was actual cans of spam. And the last thing that I might note is, despite the obvious simple nature of what's going on, pick up the mail or the inbox stuff, sort it, and then send it out the door, you can get a really quick buildup of objects really, really fast. I found myself scrambling to get things going almost immediately between sorting things and picking them up and putting away the garbage and sending them out the door. I gotta say, this Mr. Fluffykins is cute and obviously wise and about his times, has got one hell of a stressful job, I gotta say. So maybe slow things down and let them ramp up as things get going and you get more and more points, and I think you guys have potential for another great game. I could even see this being like an iPad game or something. So, very nice job. Keep up the good work, everybody over there at Twoscapes Games. After Mr. Fluffykins and his crazy sorting adventures, we have Escave by Simon at LD and his merry band of pals. Escave, of course, features a wizard who has had a bit of run of bad luck and has fallen into an evil cave full of crazy and sinister polygon beings who want to murgle him and eat his insides. But the handy thing about being a wizard is that you can deal with big nasty creatures by spawning arcane constructs, or in this case a tower, from which you will hopefully eventually escape this evil kingdom of doom. And you can also throw magical fireballs of what appears to be poison or maybe anti-magic sorcery. But we do have a bit of a problem here in that these monsters very much want to eat our delicious gooey insides and don't exactly want us escaping because that makes brunching on us very difficult, and they will attempt to assault both us and our magnificent magical tower so that we cannot effect an escape. So we have to bide our time and survive wave after wave of nasty beasties assaulting our tower. And, aptly enough, it is a tower defense game, no pun intended. So jumping right in, you start out with a selection screen. We've got to get our tower started before we can begin in the next wave, and we have three main options. We can either select a defensive tower, which makes our tower a little bit meatier, but doesn't offer us any weapons to help us defend ourselves. You have an arrow launcher, which allows you to fire in rapid succession a crossbow type arrows. They don't do as much damage, but they certainly shoot a lot faster. And then you have the flame cannon, which shoots much slower, but also offers you much more damage. And you do want a variety of damage because you have a variety of enemies. You have the balloon ting-tinglers. I'll just grab the Dr. Seuss name just for the heck of it, which will just sort of, I'd call your medium range enemies. They just kind of float up to your tower and start smacking away, or if you happen to be nearby, they will go after and try to rustle your jibs. Then, of course, you have the spinning blade triangles. These guys are quite nasty. These little beasties' entire purpose and existence is to run after you and slice and dice you until there's nothing left but a pile of red pulp. And I must say, they are quite annoying. And they can snake up on you really well, too, without any sort of effects noise. Then, of course, last but not least, are the, what do I call these? Maybe like the 18-wheeler floating juggernauts of the game, which are these giant, almost truck-like looking critters that float on a balloon of air, and they go real slow, but they take quite a beating, and that's why you want to make sure that you've got a few flame cannons to your arsenal's disposal, because arrows just won't cut it. And of course, while all of this crazy mishmash of chaos is going on, you've got to run around this tower to make sure none of them gets too close, because while your arcane construct is certainly formidable, you can't handle a bajillion enemies at once. Only maybe 2/3 to a half of them. So you've got to make sure that you've got its back while it's got yours, shooting out your green bolts of lightning, magic, or antimatter, and making them dead. So all of these elements come together really nicely. I am a long-time fan of different tower defense games, so I was really happy to see a variety of different weapons that you can attach on your castle, and also a nice variety of enemies, because obviously the spinning saw blade guys will go right for you. They're not so concerned with your tower, they just want to make you dead. And of course then you've got those balloon ting-tinglers, as I was speaking about before, that just kind of do a little bit of both. And then, if you're not careful and if you're just trying to go for the kamikaze approach with a whole bunch of arrow launchers, are the giant floating cave whales, which will pretty much obliterate your tower if they get close enough. Those things hit like a Mack truck. On the art style side of things, we have a very lovely low polygon approach to the terrain. I definitely enjoy when people just go for the minimalist appeal as opposed to high ridiculous detail and then maybe miss out on some gameplay mechanics. And despite low poly, there is a whole lot of characteristic in the different enemies. I mean, right off the bat, it didn't take long before I had already identified with all the different critters trying to murder me, and had even given them names. So very nice job on that, Mark. And I gotta say, those saw blade guys are really, really annoying. Like, I grew to loathe them very quickly, so very nice job on that, Mark. They are super duper annoying. The only thing I might change is I'd love to see some more low poly sort of artwork in the blast of your magic, because it's got kind of a weird janky hitbox that really has to be pinpoint accurate or you're not going to do much at all and you're going to get murdered pretty quickly. But on the side of sound effects, no real complaints there. I really like the background music. It's certainly right up my alley. I might, however, add a few sound effects for when those blade guys are getting real close to you, or they start attacking you, or maybe when they spawn, or just when certain enemies are interacting around you, because I had a huge issue with running up to one enemy and shooting it, and I turn around and suddenly there's like 5 or 7 or even like 8 of those blade guys chasing me around one time and damn near killed me. So some of that might be something to think about if and when you refine this game. And on the gameplay side of things, I didn't have too much complaints. That's all very straightforward. Though I would play around with the mouse acceleration. It can be a tad sensitive when you're trying to scope in and shoot from long range. But otherwise, I really dig this game. I played it all the way through about 3 times, even after I was done recording, so very nice job. Keep up the good work, and I hope see you guys around in the next Game Jam. Following Escave and Magical Wizard Adventures, we have a very fun, sort of almost goofy game called Frank Fish by Estes. Or is it Easties? And in this game, you are in this wonderful land of low-poly adventures full of polygon piglets and, I guess, PepsiCo sponsors or salesmen, and there's this crazy fish underneath of you, this giant shark called Frank, and he's getting a little bit peckish, and he's not quite satisfied with the lunch you had with him earlier, and you've got to go around the countryside murdering and going after every little witch thing and dumping him into the ocean so he can be hungry, full, and, or less hungry, full, and satisfied. In order to accomplish this merry goal, you start out on a floating platform, and you've got to nail as many of those piggies with rocks as you can and knock them off the edge and feed this gigantic lunatic fish. And, you know, you go along, and I thought it was pretty kooky, and I really enjoyed this. I definitely liked it when I first ran into one of the Pepsi salesmen, because it's like this really loud, high-pitch, almost like Alvin and the Chipmunks voice. It's like, hey, have you tried that Pepsi Light, or Pepsi Cola, or Pepsi Crystal? We've also got Pepsi Strawberry, Pepsi Blueberry, Pepsi, and you know, my favorite is Salesman Pepsi, that I'm gonna feed you to Frank the Fish, sir. And I just knocked him right off. It was one of those notions of like a businessman that you can't help but love to hate. And then, of course, there's all these crazy pigs everywhere, and you eventually get down to this island, and there's the pig god or something, and there's this giant island, or not this giant island, there's this little island with this giant pig, and all of his pig followers are around him, and I mean, you gotta be honest with me, I mean, it looked like a giant piggy bank. I had to knock him off the pedestal into the water, so that was pretty fun. All the sound effects are pretty good. You got a nice jumping animation, even though it sounds like I wanted to double jump but couldn't. And then, of course, you know, there's the voices for everything and rocks smacking around, so that was pretty nice. The one thing that really bugged, well, there was 2 of them. 2 things that really bugged me that you could look into in the future is the controls and the physics of the environment were what I would describe as really slidey and hard to control, and I was really afraid to overshoot a lot and fall to my death and end up being the one to satisfy Frank's hunger. And then the other thing was, I don't know what Frank is doing. Maybe he's just that hungry. He's like hypoglycemic or something, and he's just going nuts. His character is clipping everywhere. So other than, you know, working on Frank and some of the movements, I think it was pretty funny. I enjoyed that concept. It was definitely a good, fun sort of goofy game to play after something as existential and serious as I Remember Alice. So very nice job, Mr. Eastes. I hope to see you around in the future. I see this is your first Game Jam entry for Ludum Dare, so very nice job on that, Mark, and I will catch you around. And of course, last but not least, we have Worm Hunter by Thorig. You are a strange man in the middle of a desert. Almost looks like you're somewhere maybe in the Sahara Desert of Africa, and your job is to go out and hunt a worm, so maybe your town or village or tribe can eat worm meat tonight. And I gotta say, I am personally a big fan of worm jerky. I mean, I've always liked stepping into a slim worm gym. And you jump around, and there's a very lovely desert that you start out with. Very nice pixelated art everywhere. And you can see there's like bones and grass, and there's a nice desert. There's even some nice weather effects where you get a sandstorm that washes in periodically. And you're just like, well, where is the worm? But I did notice that you come equipped with worm lures. So you toss these little grenade-looking sparkly worm lures out, and there's the worm. You're like, oh man, what the heck? And you just run up as he jumps out of the sand and gets really tuckered out and kind of warm, and you stab at him, and then he dives back under, and you gotta watch for the shadow of the ripple of the sand before he jumps back out to try and murder you again. So it's pretty simple and straightforward. You just gotta get to the point where you see the worm and maybe toss out like a trifecta of worm bait so that it's got somewhere to go and doesn't try to bite your legs out from under you. And then you just go to town on him, and eventually you split him in twain, and you're just like, huzzah! And you can take your catch home to all of your friends. And I like this. I mean, I've always been a fan of like games and videos and movies, sort of like, what was it? There was that Grabbers movie where they're in the Colorado mountains, and there were graboids, and they were pulling them under, and then also reminded me a lot of the movie Dune. I mean, obviously that took place in a desert, even though you're not some sort of crazy sci-fi aristocrat been banished by other aristocrats out to murder your family. So I really like the environment in the game, and I think there's a lot of potential in that sort of environment to build out a story and maybe make a full game. I definitely like the artwork. I mean, if you look at it, there's even little dust motes as they walk, and the swing's got a full animation. It's a very nice job. I've also got really strong sounds. I think the only thing I might add is, like, it was a really big map, and there wasn't a whole lot going on besides looking at really cool pixel art. Maybe add, like, I don't know, like a crazy sand camel or cow, and, like, you walk up and, like, suddenly, shabam, there's the worm, he pops out and eats it. But other than that, it was pretty good. I didn't have too many complaints with the controls. The only thing I did run into graphically was the sandstorm is not always the same size as your screen or window that you're playing in. So very nice job, guys. That was really cool. I definitely got a kick. I definitely laughed quite a bit when I got eaten by the worm for the first time, because I didn't quite notice the shadow, and he eats you up and then pops your head off like a pimple and just kind of rolls on the ground. And there was that great little phrase up on the screen, well, sometimes you catch the worm, and sometimes the worm catches you, sonny. That's just how the desert plays it. Well, guys, this is another awesome, great group of games, and for anyone interested in playing these, I definitely encourage you to do so. I certainly didn't show the ending of a couple of these, so you can definitely jump in there and see for yourself how everything plays out. I have, of course, been Larry the Chupacabra. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share these videos with your friends. And if you have a suggestion for a game, or if you'd like me to check out your game in these future videos, I am still around for the next, 10, 15 days, making these awesome showcase videos when I find time. And I'd be more than happy to take a look at your awesome game and give it the playtime and showcase time that it certainly deserves. So just send me a message over Twitter, and I can definitely fit that in. Otherwise, I've been Larry the Chupacabra, and I will catch you next time. Toodaloo!